friends. Happy Thursday. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. I'm joined by Chris and John. This week, this week, we're talking about who is doing your marketing strategy, which sounds like a simple question, but it's actually more of a complex question, especially when you start thinking about strategies and frameworks and planning and metrics. And when you break all of those down, nowhere in that have you factored in people. Maybe you specifically have, but in general, frameworks don't factor in the people element of it. So we want to start to think about how you can reincorporate that element back into your planning. Um, so we're going to talk about, how to do that, what to do when you don't have the resources, and then just sort of the general mindset of why companies fail to think about the people, why it's an afterthought. So I'll start with the two of you, people. Why do you think, I'll start with you, Chris, why do you think people are an afterthought in planning?
Because people are static in the grand scheme of things. When you start up a new campaign, you have new budget, new creative, new a bunch of things, but it's the people typically don't change nearly as fast. Now, obviously, the great reshuffling has changed a lot of that. People taking buyout packages and things. You were just on a call with a client where a bunch of people are leaving their organization. But for the most part, when we think about our marketing, we assume we've got the same team of players, more or less, from campaign to campaign, month to month, and so on and so forth. And so the people kind of become an afterthought because you just kind of assume they're always going to be there, and they don't change all that much, right? One of the things we've noticed with friends, with colleagues, with clients, is that people don't invest heavily in professional development and training either, which means that when you think about the people on your team, you don't think about their evolution as a professional. You just kind of assume that they're, for lack of a better term, a cog in the machine that is there to help you do your marketing.
What about you, John?
Yeah, that is, a lot of people say that's right at the heart of most of the problems that we have, and not just in business, but in society as a whole, that we just have this factory mindset. The first and primary concern is executing on the plan, delivering the product, getting the campaign done. And yeah, the human factors are just not at the top of the list or even given any consideration in the beginning. You're just presuming that your team's going to behave within spec and be able to get all the stuff done. And yeah, unfortunately, it's a short-term thinking too. And, it would be far better if you had, a plan for every employee that's working with you as far as where they're going to go and where they end up. But yeah, those are just kind of further along. That's kind of extra mile work. It's like everybody wants to at least get the thing done today and not really think about what's going to happen next quarter, next year. But I think that's what separates the leaders from the managers.
So I was thinking about this topic a little bit last week when we were planning the show. And so I started going through some of your more traditional marketing frameworks. You have your SWOT analysis, you have your Porter's 5 Forces, the 4 P's of marketing, like name a framework and, we could talk about it, the 6 C's of data quality. And the people that are factored in are the audience. And so the audience is important. So, someone might come back and say, no, I factored in the people. It's the person who's buying the thing. But we're still missing the person who's doing the thing. And how do we start to solve for that problem? And so again, I'll be asking you guys these questions. What do you think? How do you start to solve for the problem of, I've put together a marketing strategy that includes, email and paid ads and organic search, but nowhere in this have I said who the heck is going to do this? And the plan's already set. I've got my budget. I don't have any extra money for hiring, but I never factored in whether or not I have the skill set. So I do this, you guys say to me, you're crazy, we got to fix this. How do you even start to fix it?
We fire you.
Good luck.
There's a reason why the term marketing operations has become so popular in the last 5 years, right? We had marketing, we had digital marketing. Then in 2012, 2013 is when we really first started to hear about marketing technology, where marketers were like, well, hey, we got all this extra stuff. that we're supposed to be doing and using to do our marketing. And really about, I would say 4 or 5 years ago, is when you first started hearing people talking a lot about marketing operations, so operations management of marketing. And that's where you do start to hear some of the people come into play, because obviously part of operations management and operations planning is who's going to do the thing. Up until then, people hadn't really thought about the people behind running the marketing operations. But once you start doing traditional operations management, you start looking at more operational frameworks, then yeah, the people are there. But we never really thought about it, because I mean, think about the evolution of marketing over the last 25 years. Went from the arts and crafts department to being, a department that can use, artificial intelligence and machine learning and these massive technology systems. And a lot of overhead and baggage and admin comes with that, because these systems are not as forgiving as, just change the colors on the logo or make the logo bigger. Now it's, if you don't operate the system correctly, you might accidentally waste $1 million in a day on Google Ads.
I don't know a lot of organizations that have a marketing operations person. And the ones that do aren't thinking about it in terms of resourcing and skill sets. So John, what is your thinking on this?
Yeah, for most organizations, I mean, it starts with the strategic side of it, right? When they're promising what's going to be delivered, they're at least going down the mental list of like, okay, here's who on the team can do this. And, hopefully they're not going to promise stuff that they have no capacity for in the beginning. And then after that, it's just the classic one-on-ones. You kind of usually set up something most common to do once a week, to check in with somebody and say, okay, here's what we promised. Where are you at on these things? And, what's blocking you? What do you need help with? And where are you stuck? And solve all that. I think the only improvements I've seen in that too, over like the past 20 years, is the idea of automating more of that. And there's some value in anonymous email feedback. We've seen some of these systems where once a week it sends out, 1 or 2 questions in a survey via email, and people can answer anonymously. And that does cut through and get to some of the human problems that people aren't willing to talk about, or for whatever political reasons might never get surfaced. But yeah, it just seems like the only way to do it is to continue to have regular human contact and review where things are at all the time, so you can at least try and surface problems before it gets too late. You're not delivering.
Agencies are the worst about that, where they will go out and they will sell a bunch of things that they can't do and then go, I guess we better go find some contractors to fill this gap, because we sold that we're going to have a CDP and we don't even know what that stands for.
I think that that's exactly what it is. People are, let me get the thing and then figure it out later. But later comes, and then there's nobody to do the job. I was talking with a good friend of mine and a client that she's working with. They've been trying to hire or fill the role of a VP of marketing for over 7 months, and they've had no candidates for this. And so the company still exists, marketing is still trudging along, but they have nobody who's setting the plan, setting the strategy, and nobody who's holding the team accountable. And yet somehow this is all going to keep moving forward. And so it's interesting, John, you brought up the, automation. Chris, you brought up, bringing in a new system like AI. I think the thing that gets overlooked, and again, we're still just pointing out the problems, is that somebody still has to set that up. Somebody still has to maintain it. So if you want to, do an automated email that sends out like 1 or 2 questions a week, someone still has to set it up. Someone still has to look at it. So you haven't solved the people problem. If anything, you've just, come up with a new idea that somebody has to execute, that there's nobody there to do it. It's the same thing with AI. It doesn't save you time if there's nobody there to actually work the system.
We managed that problem this week. Right. One of the issues, we had an issue yesterday with our email server, right? The machine itself had a bunch of technical issues that went wrong all at the same time. And nowhere is it documented. This is mostly my fault, but nowhere is it documented that in order for our marketing automation to work, you also need to know how the MySQL database system works. You also need to know how Linux works. You also need to know how to recover a transactional database, and you have to know how the inner workings of the marketing automation software itself. We fortunately have those skills right now in the organization. But because it's not documented, if I got hit by a bus or something, and this happened again, literally no one would have any idea how to solve this problem. And so there's a lot of dependencies that are tied to people and their skills in an organization that are not documented. Until you lose a person, you don't realize just how tangled that web is. We were talking with a client the other day about Adobe Analytics and how badly configured it can be if you're not using it correctly. And because that's not as common a skill set as Google Analytics, the people who are in charge of it, in this one instance, can't make it work as well as it could be working to deliver the results they want. So there are really big issues with what's trapped inside people's heads, never making it out of their heads, and then when you have some kind of change, somebody resigns or takes a buyout package or decides they're going to go teach yoga instead, you no longer have that implicit knowledge. It's just gone.
So, John, are you on the I'm going to go teach yoga bus?
No, I have experience with that market. I know how lucrative that really is for yoga instructors. So I'm digging the regular paycheck right now.
Well, so, you bring up, so this is another layer to this problem, is the institutional knowledge and whether or not it ever gets documented. And so you could say, well, the easy answer is just to document it. But nobody does it because documenting stuff, for a lot of people, it sucks. It's a time-consuming thing. They don't want to write down how they do it. They may not even know how the thing gets done end to end. They may only have a small piece of it. So, I know how I would answer this question, but I want to ask you guys, how do we start to solve for this problem? How do you start to factor people into your planning?
Part of it is
people.
Get rid of the people. You can engineer out the people. Yes. Just
Sure.
Tossing the people overboard doesn't solve any of the problems. But again, it goes back to this thing of leadership. If you're treating your people right, they're going to be less likely to bail, and as much as it feels good to, have documentation for everything and have it straight. You still ultimately have to draw the line somewhere. And if you're doing documentation, you're working on something that, doesn't benefit a customer directly today. So, to kind of maximize profitability, you have to figure out where that line is of how much stuff gets documented versus, what's billable. But we are reaching this really interesting point where there's been so many companies that have treated their people so poorly for so long that they are all willing to pull the trigger and bail. And we're seeing these places have, challenges that they've never faced before. Because you can, the people were already angry, so they were definitely not raising their hand to document anything. They were considering that part of their job security, which now they're willingly giving up. So, it becomes a human and training issue. I think, starting off with making sure your companies at least say they're happy and are, not looking actively for other positions. That's at least your first line of defense.
When you think about it, this goes back to the 5P framework, right? You have your purpose, people, process, platform, and performance, which when you break it down, the cooking analogy we always go is, what's on the menu? What's the recipe? Do you have the ingredients? Do you have the tools? Do you have the chef? Right. And the chef is always, in this case, the chef is the issue. Like, do you have the person who can follow the recipe? If there's no recipe, then anybody can be the chef because it doesn't matter what you cook, right? So the question is, do you have the recipe, for what's on the menu? And if you don't, how do you get it so that a chef who has some skills can learn it quickly, right? Some things like making plain pasta, pretty easy, right? You can teach pretty much anybody that. Making a beef Wellington and doing it well, that's a lot harder that's a tougher recipe. And the challenge with a lot of documentation internally is you have to decide, okay, what are things that are regular? What are things that are irregular? So documenting like monthly server maintenance for your marketing servers, that's something that should be documented because it is a regular thing. And if nobody does it, these are the consequences. For example, one of our servers, we have a known issue with the software on it. it will crash after 90 days. Like the server will just boom, stop working. So every 30 days we do maintenance on it, and it just keeps on humming along fine. That's a documented known thing. There's something written down that says if we don't do this, these are the consequences. On the other hand, when you have one-offs, like, oh, yesterday the InnoDB log file went out of sync, that doesn't happen regularly, right? So it's probably good to make some notes. Oh, like this is what I was working on yesterday, but because the knowledge to cook that exotic dish that only happens once every so often is so specialized, you may not necessarily even be able to write it down or be able to explain what happened. So I would say from a risk management perspective, getting the recipes down that have the biggest impact and that are regulars is probably top of the list.
So you're both bringing up really good points about the business continuity planning. And so making sure you have those redundancies built in. But in terms of putting a marketing plan together in the first place, where I would start with that is don't plan in a vacuum. So the number one thing that you can do wrong is fly in all of your really expensive executives to sit around a big oak conference table and make this plan and then walk away. Well, guess what? None of the people who actually have to do the thing were involved in the planning. So they didn't have a say. They couldn't tell you, oh, well, actually, we've been doing it this way, or this is what we've been doing instead. And so not planning in a vacuum is a great way to start to break down that we don't know who's going to do the thing. Because what you may find out is we don't have the skills or resources, or we have a heck of a lot more skills and resources than we thought we had. So the plan that we were putting together as the old overpaid executives is way outdated and not going to meet the customers where they are. And so getting, John, to your point, that employee satisfaction, getting people more involved in that planning, having a voice, having a say, giving them that sense of ownership over the planning process, and then their piece of it starts to put together like, okay, who are the resources that we have? Who don't we have? But maybe, we find out that John has really, really been dying to be a TikTok influencer, and he's really been focusing on the best practices for creating TikTok videos. And so we're like, oh, you know what, John, why don't you go ahead and own that piece of the plan and sort of do some experiments and see what happens when you're doing, the Carlton Shuffle on TikTok, and see if anybody, responds to it and starts to buy stuff from Trust Insights. My guess is probably not. But you never know, because you've been studying TikTok for so long. And I wasn't aware of it because I historically had just been doing the planning by myself and not asking you guys like, hey, what do you think about this? Do we have the capabilities for this? And so that it does a couple of things. It breaks down that barrier of the hierarchy, which quite honestly is very outdated. Yes, people have their functions and their responsibilities, but that you can only talk to the person who's at the same level of you or above, like, that's just silly. So get rid of that. And then start, talking with the rest of your team when you're building those plans. Don't plan in a vacuum. What do you guys think of that solution? Good, bad, indifferent?
It goes with sales, right? One of the things that I think I certainly pride us on as a company is never selling something we can't do, because we know pretty clearly what is within our wheelhouse and what's not. The same thing is true for marketing teams, whether or not you work, in an agency setting or not. When you commit to do things, if you don't know the capabilities of your people, you run into serious issues. And I think one of the things that's very interesting, what you said, Katie, is more on the second side, which is dramatically underestimating what it is that your team can do. If you don't know what someone's capabilities are and they don't tell you, you are essentially missing out on revenue. It's like having a chef who's like, oh, by the way, I learned how to make sushi. Like, okay, cool. So, now that this is something you can add to your menu. I know, granted, if you're an Italian, steakhouse, that may not be the exactly the thing to offer on the menu, but at least you know that it's there. Maybe, have him open up a food truck at lunchtime outside. If you don't ever do that skills inventory, you have no idea what the capabilities are. When we worked back in our old agency, one of the things that was constantly a challenge for agency leadership, was to understand what our team was capable of. They really didn't know. And as a result, either they oversold or undersold those capabilities, just because they were not in touch. So having, even if it's just, getting together people for lunch and learns or beers on Fridays and things, that's at least something.
I agree with that. And I think that it's interesting because when we talk about this people problem of, who's doing the marketing strategy, I think the assumption is you don't have the resources. But think about it in terms of, are you underestimating your resources? I mean, again, maybe John is an amazing TikTok influencer. And just because we've never asked him, we don't know this. And so, John, are you an amazing TikTok influencer?
I'm doing the Carlton right now. Franco Riviere, greatest physical comedian of the 19th, 20th, and 21st century. But you totally nailed it, and that is a very strategic thing that you have to keep in mind. You want to align all the strategic factors in your direction before you go off to that big board meeting with the C-level folks, because if you go into cold into one of those meetings and one of the other C chairs is like, hey, what's going on with this TikTok thing? Like, you can't be sitting there saying, I have no idea. You want to be there saying, well, we met with everyone last week and we covered all the new channels. And John's got his Carlton TikToks ready to drop as soon as the word comes. We're ahead of it. And that's the key, because and there's nothing worse too than going to the C-level meeting and coming back to the team meeting and just being like, okay, here's the dumpster full of refuse that's been dropped on us that we now have to do. Like, you at least want to try and get in front of that. And even in a best case, you'd be briefing the C team about, okay, here's everything that we see going on, and this is where we think we should be going, as opposed to letting somebody else define the path for you. But Carlton's always the answer. So that's
Well, and I think that you really hit on, the core point of the conversation is, if you're planning in a vacuum with people who are out of touch of what the team is capable of, your plan is doomed from the start, because then you're dropping this plan on people who, number one, they don't have the context for what you were really intending, because a lot of plans don't include some kind of measurement or success measure to say, like, this is how we know the plan worked. Like, so if we say, John, I want you to go get more sales, your first question is probably like, how much? It's a great question. That's on me to define that. And if I'm not giving you that information, I'm not setting you up for success. I'm not giving you direction on where I want the sales to come from. So if you're like, great, I just got, 5 new clients in the healthcare industry. Well, I didn't want them in the healthcare industry. I wanted them over here. I didn't tell you that. So I'm not setting up my people for success. So I then don't have the resources to do the job, because you've just gotten a whole bunch of business because you did what I asked, but I didn't give you enough information to say, this is exactly what it is that we need and why. So again, involving the rest of your team in the planning. I think the thing that drives me the most nuts is this idea of these, like, behind closed doors meetings. It has to be super secretive. Only, higher level people have the capability to think strategically. That's dumb. So just put that out of your head. That's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Anybody can contribute to a strategy if you give them the opportunity to do so.
What, you mean we're not having a senior leadership retreat?
No, we are absolutely not. It's one of those things that's I've always felt like that construct is so backward, because the people who are doing the work, the quote unquote junior and mid-level folks, are the ones who are in the weeds and know the information and the customers the best. And so to then not involve them in those conversations about where do we go from here is such a missed opportunity. And so maybe they're not responsible for making decisions, but they should be factoring into the conversation of what's happening and why, because they're the people who have the information.
What if they don't know?
Then that's a conversation to be like, why don't you know? What are we as an organization not doing that we can't get that information? And so I always try to position it as, it's not a blame thing. So like, Chris, if I say to you, why aren't we getting more customers? I don't know. Well, whose job was it? It's us collectively as an organization not setting people up for success to get that information. Maybe we don't have the process. Maybe we don't have the platform to collect that information, but that's something that we collectively need to look at.
That makes sense for an SMB, but when you start getting into enterprise, where you have marketing departments of several hundred people, how do you corral that so that it's not a 200-person conference call?
So, I think that comes down to, so again, I hate like that it's a top down thing, but setting those expectations of here's the kind of information that we need to put the plan together, and setting those expectations early and often, even if they change. So let's say you have, three different divisions within your marketing team of 100 people. So theoretically, you would then have three different marketing directors. You bring each of those marketing directors together at least once a month to say what's going on with your team, what's new, what's broken, what isn't working. And it's that constant communication channel and making sure that they are partnering versus working against each other. And it gets more complicated the bigger the teams get. You can have 1,000-person teams. You can have, hundreds of thousands of people, like a Google, for example. You need to make bringing those people together to talk about what's going on a priority, even if it's once a quarter. Somehow there needs to be some sort of a community system, a digest, something of here's what's going on. But you, as maybe the person who's responsible for setting the course of the company, need to be clear about what is that information that I need to know in order to do my job, so that I can then set you up for success to do your job, hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's human factors on the other side of that too, right? It's like a product never stays the same as far as the amount of value it delivers. It can go up and down, and stuff becomes completely obsolete. So you're always having to respond to that too. You can have the same batch of people, be incredibly successful, or have a complete, dumpster fire failure, all because of, what the state of the market is at the time.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of companies right now are in this position of they don't have the resources. They can't hire for the resources. The resources aren't available. What do we do there? So we've set this plan. We've set this strategy. We said we're going to do the thing. But now we have literally no one to do the thing. What do we do?
Well, if you have no one to do the thing, you better update your LinkedIn profile, because your company's going out of business. But that's where that inventory of skills comes in handy, right? So again, back to the restaurant analogy. If all you've got left is the pastry chef, then you throttle back your menu to the recipes that the pastry chef can execute on. So they can do all the basics, pasta, baked chicken, and stuff like that. And then all the pastries. And you either say, we have a reduced menu because we've have a staffing shortage, or you say, hey, guess what? We're a pastry restaurant now. Now we serve pastries, because you work with what you got, but you can't. It's something that my martial arts teacher always says. Don't reach for something that isn't there. If you have these grandiose marketing plans that rely on somebody, for example, with connected TV experience, and you don't have that either in your agencies or in your staff, you can't realistically do that. I mean, you can wing it and try, but it'd be like me just saying, oh, I'm just going to try this whole neurosurgery thing. I'm just going to wing it. How hard can it be? It's just a scalpel. It's not going to end in success. So because people are the linchpin of, people, process, and platform, if you don't have the skills, you don't have the skills. It's not an inventory anymore. Just like if you don't have flour, you can't make a cake, right? Some kind of flour. If all you have is sand, you're not making a cake. I don't care how talented you are. You're not making cake. At least not a cake that anyone's going to want to eat.
You've clearly not heard of flourless cakes.
There's still some kind of edible ingredient there. It's not sand.
No.
It better not be sand.
I mean, who knows?
Sand cake.
What say you, John?
Yeah, it's, like you said, you just can't create what's not there. I think one one thing that's changed is that so much of this has been fueled by this great resignation and people being dissatisfied with the organizational structure at work, that you do have a lot of abilities to outsource stuff. There's a lot of projects and things, and you can make that case to senior management that, like, look, we just can't do this anymore because we lost these 4 people. And so now your choices are, we take the next 6 months and roll the dice. Can we train somebody or hire somebody to fill that? Or do we just want to bite the bullet and throw some cash down now and have a team come in that can get it done within 3 months or 6 months or whatever? So that, it's not all bad news. There is more opportunity to outsource and try and get things done. But yeah, if you're going to be hiring, get ready for a rough 12 months. I don't see things getting any easier in the near future.
I would agree with that. So it sounds like the big takeaways of who's doing your marketing strategy is stay connected with your teams. Don't plan strategies in a vacuum without talking with your teams, because you may be over or underestimating their skill sets. And then make sure that you're checking in maybe quarterly to do that skill set inventory to say, have you learned something new? Have you taken your TikTok knowledge and applied it to Snapchat? Or is there something else that you're starting to explore that we aren't even aware of that we could start doing experiments on? And so really the bottom line is keep talking to your people, keep checking in with them, making sure that they're happy with what they're doing. If they're eager to do other things, what are those things? How does it factor into the work that you currently do? And then don't be afraid of bringing on contractors as sort of that stopgap for while you're trying to hire someone full time. You may find out that the contractors that you have are doing the job. But I guess just don't forget that at the end of the day, whether it's a new AI piece of software that you think is going to automate everything that you're doing, someone still has to set that up. If it's, bringing on a new team, someone still has to hire and train that team. If you're, doing buyouts for your people because you need to cut back, you still need those transition plans and documentation of what the heck it is they do. Those are just realities that you cannot get around. Technology will not solve those problems for you.
And the big thing with people, and this goes back to the 5P framework, is purpose isn't just organizational either. It is person level. If you don't know what motivates the people on your team, you're going to lose them at a certain point, because you're going to try and solve things with the wrong solution. If somebody is really adamant, like their purpose is all about social good, and you say, we're going to put a foosball table in the break room. Well, guess what? That's not going to motivate that person in the slightest. You can only understand that through detailed conversations with the people on your team, and you have to be willing to listen to those answers and even to ask those questions that can be uncomfortable questions.
Yeah, one thing, don't be afraid to have fun with part of that too. You can say to your team, look, give 2 hours a week or something to work on something that's just way outside of the normal things going on. And it's fine to have them report back too. Like once a month, do a lunch and learn where people come in and just talk about, look how good my TikTok yoga videos are doing. You can share that and people can start to get ideas and, encourage people to play around outside of just what they're doing for their job every day.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I look forward to seeing your TikTok yoga videos, John.
I'm telling you, the Carlton, man, it's going to be the Carlton.
Carlton yoga. That'll be interesting.
Wow.
Any final thoughts?
It's hard to. I threw the Carlton down too early. It should have been rolling out on the Carlton. That would have been the closer.
I think that's a good place to say we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.